Welcome back to the All I Ever Wanted podcast. Today, we really got to discuss what's happening in the world. You know, we get asked daily now, what do you think about this recession? What do you think about inflation? What do you think about national debt problems, world debt problems, all that kind of stuff? And, you know, there's so much information around the world floating around, scaring people or just lying to people, saying there are no problems, stuff like that. This is going to be in response basically to Michael Burry. And if you don't know who that is basically who, if you watch The Big Short, everything was based off of how he interpreted the market in his first plays. And take it for what you want. I actually suggest you watch that movie because while, you know, it's made for Hollywood and a few things are over dramatized, the reality is it does sum up quite well what happened back then and how that also ties into what's happening now. A lot of things were just rephrased. If you don't know what fractional reserve banking or fractional reserve lending is, you need to go and look that up so you understand what's going on. A few other terms are brought up in that movie, and I think you really need to research what all of it means. I'm not going to get into it here because that's what Google's for. I'm going to give you my opinion on what Michael Burry said about the degree, the severity of what this particular point in our current economics looks like to myself and the people within my group internationally. First off, understand that pre-pandemic, are we allowed to use that word, Producer Mac? Is that a word that's not tolerable on YouTube? The average Canadian had roughly 6 to 8 weeks worth of finances should they, no longer receive an income. That's not great. That's basically saying 2 months before they would completely run out of money and not be able to afford to live. Coming out of the pandemic as of mid last year kind of thing, that number has shrunk closer in most households between 2 and 4 weeks. So 1 or 2 paychecks away from not being able to meet their monthly obligations. That is a scary fact. Couple that with the knowledge, the world knows now roughly what the world banks have done over the last decade to 12 years to come out of the 08-09 crash. The world owes itself $40+ trillion worth of artificially printed money, not backed by any type of commodity. It owes itself that. It has to burn that much to bring things back into balance. So let's go back to Michael Burry claiming we're going to have one of history's largest collapses. So many times during the end of 06 and 07 when he was calling for this housing bubble collapse, it kept getting shored up by financial institutions and banks and rating agencies. Let's say, we're not going to say lying, I don't like that word, but altering and repackaging the truth to keep the financial sector afloat. But all you've seen for the last 6 to 8 years is pretty much the exact same thing. The government repackaging, rebranding, we'll call it debt, deficit, stimulus plans, student loan debt forgiveness. Now we're calling things like reparation payments. We have to understand that even if it's intended to help people, this money isn't real. It's not tied to anything. There's no commodity being exchanged for this money. I know it sounds like we're going off on a whole bunch of different tangents, but every time you hear more money being spent, it's adding to a deficit, not backed by a product, service, or idea that can be sold to recover that money. There isn't a lump of gold sitting somewhere in a reserve tied to that new money that's just been printed off, sent out, or digitally added to someone's bank account. The reason the economy is shored up right now is because every time this digital currency, and I'm not talking about coins, I'm talking about, a number that electronically increases a person's bank account, because we don't really deal with paper checks much anymore. people go and spend that, keeping the economy up. So all the prices that you see, all this inflation is based on the ability of people to spend money that hasn't been earned. It's been handed to them from the government. Now, are you trying to, can you understand just how big of a fall has to come out of this? We can keep slapping Band-Aids on, we can keep printing more money, a loaf of bread, your dozen eggs, your carton of milk. Have you noticed how much more expensive it is every time there's more relief coming in the form of subsidies and rebates? Do you notice how it times out identically? So if we've skirted a recession for a decade with money that was just printed, you know, we should have seen a collapse or at least a heavy recession years ago. So if we've skirted it with even more fake money, ask yourself, how hard of a fall do you think this is going to be? I tend to lean towards the way that Michael Burry is calling it, a full economic collapse. That's not to scare you. That's so you understand why that it's going to happen and how it can't be avoided. If there's over 40 trillion, we're not even in the billions anymore, $40 trillion plus added to the world's economy to keep it afloat, and the world only generates 83 to 86 trillion a year in revenue, half of that has to go away. That's in the form of job losses, really expensive products. Money essentially has to be brought back to the reserve, burnt, and removed from the system, so it doesn't go back out to pay salaries, to give out any more rebates. So please do your research and look up all those terms. And like I'll go say, go back to The Big Short. Watch it once, make notes, watch it twice, try and understand what they're saying, then Google all those terms. Because everything starts basically back from the term fractional reserve lending or banking. Once you understand that and how money is no longer tied to a commodity, you'll understand how much trouble North America's in. And every time you use that high interest credit card, every time you go get a high interest car loan, you have to add all of that onto the fact that current inflation, static inflation in North America, Canada's a little lower, but you're still dealing with numbers in the 6.5% to 8 or 9% if you properly calculate it. So if you're also paying 8% on your car loan, or you're paying 20% on your credit card, and your actual income is being chewed at 7% a year by inflation, you have to add that to the cost of what you're buying. That 8% car loan with inflation working against your money is actually costing you 15%. So this is why we're telling you, think before you make those purchases. We have another video out, producer Mac will put a link somewhere, telling you why we think you should not be making any major personal purchases for at least the next 20 to 22 months. I suggest you watch that. But again, if you have any questions, it would take us hours to turn this into breaking down everything point by point. If you have any questions, please write them in the comments. One of us will get back to you. But for now, I'm Chris, that's producer Mac, All I Ever Wanted podcast, keeping you up to date on what you should be looking for out there in your community, your economy, and really any opportunities that you should have to better your life. We're out.